A while back I loaded everybody up in the truck and we drove for hundreds of miles to pick up an old Honda three-wheeler that hadn't been ran in years and was in really poor condition. But it was a great time. You can check it out if you want. The reason I went to such trouble to get a piece of junk is because if the engine runs, it'll be a great upgrade for the Trail 90. More power, electric starting, brighter lights, and the possibility of even making a little bit of money. If I can pop the ATC engine in there, I can sell the original motor as well as all the extra parts for the three-wheeler. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't even know if this engine runs. For all I know, they might have used the crankcase to store sand. So that's what we'll try to sort out today. The first thing I want to do is see if the motor will even turn. The pull cord is broken, so I'll just remove this shift lever and side cover and see what it looks like underneath. Okay. It looks beautiful! Alright, I sprayed some oil over on the other side in the spark plug hole to hopefully loosen things up. So what are the odds that this thing turns? Ooh. Well, it felt kind of weird. Something isn't right in there. Let's go this way. Yeah, I think we've got a broken crankshaft situation or something. Unless there's a ratchet mechanism for the starter, but I doubt that. Yeah, I might have wasted my time, everybody. So I went over to the other side and put a screwdriver in the spark plug hole, and the piston is going up and down, but it's getting hung up right at top dead center, and that's where it just stops. So I'm thinking I've got a valve stuck open perhaps, or maybe a broken cam chain, so I'll pull this cover off next. Well, here's some good news. At least the cam chain isn't broken, so the next thing I'll do is take off these valve caps to see if maybe I have a stuck valve, and that's what's keeping that piston from freely going to the top and down again. Well, I found a problem, and I probably made it worse by forcibly turning the engine over. Both the intake valve and the exhaust valve are stuck down and probably bent. So I guess the head's coming off. Ooh! I hope that's the oil I sprayed in there, not water. We'll call it oil. We'll call it oil. Well, this is actually encouraging. Look how clean the engine is under there. Not bad. Well, here's what I have to deal with. Both valves are stuck open. I'm not really sure how that happens, but on the plus side, look how clean this thing is. I do need to remember, though, that this is the Trail 90's almost 20-year junior, so it stands to reason that it looks a little bit better inside. But it's a mark in the positive category nonetheless. So I'll start cleaning up this combustion chamber and shooting some light oil down by these valves in the hopes of getting them back down where they belong. Well, after digging into the cylinder head a little bit, here's what I've figured out. I was able to loosen up the exhaust valve, and it still seems to be in really good condition, so I'll keep that in service. However, I wasn't able to close the intake valve because it's bent. In fact, you might even be able to see the deformation in the stem there. Now, I don't know if this is the result of something I did or the fault of the previous owner, but no matter, I was able to get another valve from eBay which fits like a glove, so the next step is to get everything reassembled. Now it's time for everybody's favorite job, reinstalling the valve springs. To do it, I'll use my homemade valve spring compressor tool, which is just a modified 3/4 inch copper pipe coupling and a C-clamp. And after the valve spring is compressed, the retainers just drop right in. Yeah, right. Alright, I've got the head reassembled and ready to install, and I've got to tell you, I did something that's really out of character for me. I purchased a brand new head gasket just for this project. That's how excited I am about the ATC 125 engine. So I've got the bike tipped up over here, ready to accept the head. Let's see if we can get this top end put back together. The recipe calls for tightening these down to 15 foot-pounds of torque. And of course it's best practice to tighten them down little by little, incrementally. There we are. Now let's move over to the camshaft side. If I want this engine to run, I need to make sure that the valves open and shut at the right time. So I'll set up my cam timing. Now that that's done, I can install the camshaft. I've generously coated it with some gear oil, and hopefully it goes right in. Okay, camshaft is in. Now I can install this cover. As you can see, I've got the Ginny's Garage silicone special on the engine here. And with this cover in place, now I can install the timing advance mechanism and rotor. Now let's get this timing plate back on, and the cover. The next thing I want to do is change the engine oil, so I'll tip it back down for that. Hopefully this isn't too bad. I've seen worse. Alright, the long block is assembled, the oil has been changed. Next, let's get a carburetor on here. So here's the carburetor that came with the ATC. Unfortunately, I can't use it because this fuel inlet is cracked, and have a look at the innards. I call that junk. But luckily, I was able to find a replacement carburetor on eBay. This one is in overall good shape. It's already cleaned out and ready to use. The only complaint I have about it is this gouge here where the cap screws on. I think it will still work, but I'm a little bit grumpy at the seller because there was no mention of this in the listing. But oh well, you take what you can get sometimes. Let's get this thing bolted up. Okay, I've got the carburetor installed, and in a perfect world, I'd like to be able to hear this engine run before transplanting it into the Trail 90. But unfortunately, this ATC came to me without an ignition coil, and I'm too impatient to wait for the one to arrive that I've already ordered. So I think the next best thing to hearing this motor run is hooking up a battery and verifying that the electric starting system works and that the engine turns over freely. If all that checks out, I'll have enough confidence to make the swap. I've got my battery all connected, and just have a look at what happens when I touch these two wires together. That's good enough for me. Time to separate the engine from the frame. After disconnecting all the accessories, the only thing holding the motor in place is these two bolts. Okay, go ahead. It's out. Phase 1 complete. So, am I really going to take apart this fully functioning motorcycle just to replace the engine with one which it wasn't designed for and may not even run? Well, there's the answer. No turning back now. To make the new motor work in the Trail 90, the wiring and electrical system from the ATC need to be installed with it. So I've got all the old wires removed and the ATC 125 harness threaded into the pan here. The next thing I want to work on is building an enclosure for this new 12-volt battery, which is quite a bit larger than the 6-volt battery that it will be replacing. To build my bracket, I will be slightly modifying the ATC 125 battery box. I need to make something that won't just hold the new battery in place, but also provide mounting points for the electrical parts that I'll be transferring to the motorcycle. I'll start by making an L-shaped tray that the battery can rest on. After that's carved out, I can add some provisions for attaching the other parts. My welder comes in handy here, but I need to be careful because this metal is thin and really easy to burn through, especially if you're new to the welding game like I am. To hold the conglomeration in place, I'll weld 2 bolts to the back of it that'll line up with these holes in the frame. Just one more shot of the lightning glue should do it. It's not quite Fabergé, is it? Oh well, let's see if it fits. The system worked. So I'm pretty happy with the way this bracket turned out, and I was able to attach the rectifier and the ignition box to it. But I still need to find somewhere to put this starter solenoid. I think up underneath the gas tank here, where the original ignition coil was mounted, is as good a place as any. To mount the solenoid in the Trail 90, I'll try to salvage the original bracket, which is still attached to the ATC frame. I guess that works. I've discovered that the spacing of these holes is very convenient. Better grab this bracket too. Thank you. Now I'll just zap these two together. Hey, that's a good looking coil holder if I've ever saw one. Now let's put it up here so nobody ever sees it again. I've got my relocated electrical parts tucked in here now, along with the new battery, and I also ran a couple of wires up here to the headlight bucket to control the brake light, something that wasn't originally designed into this ATC wire harness. And I think the only things I have left to do electrically are fix up this ignition switch so it can control 2 circuits instead of just one, and modify this left-hand perch to accept a start button. The original ignition switch on the Trail 90 just made a single connection between the battery and ignition wire. What the ATC wiring harness calls for is something a little bit different. I need to have a switch that when in the on position connects the battery to the chassis electrical, and when in the off position connects this engine kill switch wire to ground. I'm lucky because this Trail 90 ignition already has provisions for what I need. I'll keep these wires in place to control the 12-volt circuit, and I'll add another one of these contacts over here and solder a couple of wires to these pads to control the kill switch. I'll sacrifice this old switch we had laying around to get the extra parts that I need. So I'll just drop the additional contact plate in here, then reassemble the back cover and solder 2 new wires to it. Back into the bike now, and how about a test? That'll work. I'd like to put my start button right here, and I don't mind tearing out the guts to this turn signal switch to do it because I don't have turn signals. They were an option in 1969 and not required by law. Officer. To attach the ATC starter button to the Trail 90, I need to modify this aluminum housing a little bit. I'm using the Dremel tool to create grooves for the switch to fit into and my file to make a flat mounting surface. I'll remove the perch now so I can drill and tap a hole in the top of it for this screw that'll hold the button assembly in place. Next, I'll cut these old turn signal wires, which I can reuse in the starter circuit by connecting them to the new switch. Time to put it back together. Oh, one more thing. There. The electrical work is done, and we're getting dangerously close to mounting the new engine in the frame. But before I do that, I need to trim a little bit of metal off the front end of this swing arm because the left case on the new engine sticks out a little bit more than on the original Trail 90 motor. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, put the bolt in. Push. Perfect. Ooh, I like the way it looks in there. We're getting really close to trying to start this thing up. I've got the fuel tank installed, the electrical connected, including this ignition coil that came in the mail. This mounting system is my own design, but I've run into a problem. Unfortunately, my exhaust pipe won't work. I've got 2 problems. The bolt pattern on this bracket isn't the same as on the head, and this mounting surface doesn't approach the head at the correct angle. So I've got a dilemma. I really hate to chop up my custom-made exhaust system before I even know if the new engine runs. So before I start hacking this thing up, I'll temporarily install the 3-wheeler muffler onto the Trail 90 to see if I can detect any signs of life in the new motor. So let's see if we can wedge this thing in here. Hey, that looks almost factory. I've got the lowboy exhaust bolted on, and I guess now it's time to see if this was all worthwhile. Well, that sounds promising to me. I guess it's time to start butchering. Forgive me. Modifying this exhaust system is pretty straightforward. I just need to cut off the flange and stub end from the motorcycle pipe and replace them with parts taken from the old ATC muffler. It'll fit,
Now I'll bolt the ATC portion to the head, put the muffler on the motorcycle to align the two parts, and weld them together. If I'm lucky, the finished product will be compatible with the engine and the chassis, all at the same time.
Well, look here, it took. And that should do it for exhaust fabrication work. Time for some paint. I feel like I've done this before. Well, here we are. The paint's dry. It looks good. Enough. Let's get it installed. Well, the exhaust pipe is on. Check that one off the list. But I was just trying to install this down tube skid plate combination, and I ran into an issue. Come over here, I'll show you. It looks like the timing case on the ATC engine sticks out farther than on the Trail 90 motor. So when I tried to install the skid plate, impact is experienced. So what I'll do, instead of trying to bend this part around the new engine, is build a couple of brackets that will extend from the frame down here to this engine mount, which wasn't present on the original Trail 90 engine. This will firm up the motor in the frame and tie this whole area together aesthetically.
So I fooled around with some cardboard to figure out the basic shape of what I want, and now I'll cut out two rough duplicates of that pattern from some 1/8 inch steel. I'm drilling some holes next, that way I can bolt the pieces together and machine them as one unit, so they'll be as closely matched as possible. Now I'll attach the plates to the frame and mark where the lower hole needs to be. After I drill that out, it's time to smooth down the rough edges with the bench grinder, the Dremel tool, and the sander. What I'm left with is a couple of fully functioning motor mounts. But we're not done yet. Let's waste a little more time. You know, if it's not custom, what's the point, right? Just a couple finishing touches now? That's more like it. Time for some paint.
It took me 2 days to build the brackets, but I think this looks spectacular. And we're getting close to finishing up this project. The next thing I want to address is this little ankle tickler over here. I won't be reinstalling the pull start mechanism because it sticks out farther than I'd like, and this isn't a lawnmower. So I'll put together a custom solution instead. The first thing I'll do over here is remove this wheel and cut off these cogs.
By doing this, it'll help to make the engine about 1/2 inch narrower. I could also call this a high-performance, lightweight flywheel upgrade. Just be sure to calculate the horsepower increase out to the 5th decimal place. Once the teeth are removed, I can replace the wheel, then use this cardboard cutout to trace a pattern on some 1/8 inch aluminum.
Time to cut. Okay, take 2. Time to cut with my eye protection properly affixed.
Come on, 40-year-old jigsaw, don't fail me now.
It would have been much easier making this left side case if I would have kept the original pull start housing, but I threw it away in haste. So to mark out where the screws need to be in this plate, I've made some bolts that have pointy tips and threaded them into the holes. That way I can place my aluminum on here and just hit the areas where the screws need to be with a rubber mallet. 1, 2, 3.
Now I'll drill holes where the marks are and hope it lines up.
The plate fits, but I need to figure out a way to match it up to the outer edge of this case. I have an idea. I think I'll call this paint and pound.
I'll lay down a thick coat of primer on here, then put the piece back on the motor, and a few wallops with the mallet should create a visible outline of the case, which can be used as a guide.
I can work with that.
Next item on the agenda is trimming the plate down,
But this Dremel tool that I bought just about a year ago is already broken. The high-speed function no longer works. Just junk. You go into Lowe's, you buy junk. You go into Home Depot, you buy junk. Brought in on a boat.
Well, I drove into town, picked up a brand new top-of-the-line Dremel 200, and now that I have a rotary tool that actually turns, I'm using that depression I made as a reference to remove the last little bit of material and carefully sculpt this cover into its final shape. Here's how the plate came out after some finished sanding. Let's see how it fits. Not bad, but I think it needs a finishing touch. There we go. And with that cover installed, there's only two things I have left to do before I can start tidying up the garage. And they are, install the foot pegs and the shift lever. I'll put the foot pegs on first. I had to take a little bit of material off right here and right here to make room for the wider ATC case, but otherwise they should bolt on just fine. I'm hoping this is the last time I'll need to get underneath here, at least for a while. The foot pegs are on with no room to spare, and now let's talk about the final piece of this puzzle, the shift lever. The CT90 shifter won't work because of the placement of this shaft. The ATC lever will bolt on, but if I leave it in the factory configuration, it sticks out too far from the engine. So let's see if we can bring it into spec. I think it'll work a little bit better upside down. Yeah. Let's go with that. Looks like we need to take out this bend so the lever will clear my new case cover. I almost didn't have a chance to use fire in this video. That was a close one. While the metal is still hot, I'll try to use a combination of workshop tools to remove this kink and straighten out the pedal. That's looking better. Now let's turn this innie into an outie. After I pull off this rubber sleeve, I can cut off the tow bar. Not sure if that's the proper term. I want to remount this piece on the other side of the lever, but instead of putting it back on directly opposite of its original location, I'll bring it toward the shaft here a couple of inches to put the pedal at a nice comfortable distance from the foot pegs. I don't know about you, but I always feel like I'm taking great steps for safety whenever I put shoes on to weld. When the welding is done, it will definitely look terrible, so I need to quickly erase evidence of my ineptitude, then I'll trim off this excess length. Some final shaping now with the bench grinder and sander. Almost done? Almost done? And it's still daytime? There, done. Ready to see if it was worth it? Hey, I thought we might go on a test drive, but you just look grumpy. We'll find out why next time. Thanks for watching.